want to do a little poll of the room. Has anyone here heard of the TV show Love is Blind? A few, okay. So this is a reality dating show, which I'm sure this is the correct target audience for. And it is this very interesting show where people have to date each other without ever seeing each other. And so what happens is all these contestants are in these individual rooms and they are asking each other questions and getting to know each other, and they have to decide whether or not they want to get engaged without ever actually seeing the other person, which is crazy. It's a wild premise, and so this show has got seasons in like a bunch of different countries. It's done really well. And what you see happen in this show is because the contestants can't actually see each other, they are imagining what the other person is like. Now, obviously, they're imagining what the other person looks like, but they're also imagining how does this person act? They're imagining what kind of a partner this person will be. They're imagining what their life could be like together. And so you see over time that these people fall in love with an idea that they've created of someone else and not actually the real person. And obviously there's often disappointment when they do actually meet the real person. And I wanted to tell you guys about this tonight, not to give you a TV show recommendation, because I actually really don't recommend this show, but I wanted to ask us the question, how often do we do this with God? How often do we build our own version of a God that we like, that is based off what we want, our own values? See, we fall in love with an idea of God, of our own imagination, instead of actually seeing him for who he is. I don't know if you've ever heard someone say something like, oh, my God would never do that, or my God would be totally fine with that. There's this famous saying that says, God made man in his image, and man has been returning the favor ever since. And when we do this, we take the things that we already believe, the things that we fear, the things that we want, and we project that onto God. We say things like, the God that I serve aligns with this political leader that I already like, or this idea that I already support. And you know that you've built a God for yourself when he thinks and acts just like you do. See, a God that we've built for ourselves would never disagree with us, would never disrupt our plans, would never challenge us to die to ourselves. And we end up with this DIY God that's like our best friend, which is great, and he should be your best friend. But we do this thing where he's kind and he's loving and he's forgiving, but he's not Lord of our life. He's not our king. He doesn't have authority. Eugene Peterson says that our tendency most of the time is to reduce God to the dimensions of our lives and make him the custodians of our comforts. We get a piece of the gospel that makes us feel good, and we decide to specialize in that part, leaving out everything else. And this quote comes from this short essay that Eugene Peterson wrote, and the title of that essay is, "A Packaged God is No God at All." A packaged God is no God at all. See, a God that we've edited for ourselves is not God. It's a false image of him. We have to actually see God for who he is. See, our call as Christians is not to play Build-A-Bear with God, where we build our own God. It's actually to discover who he already is. And so this term, the series that we're going to be doing at Youth is called What a God. And the aim of this series is that we would see God for who he really is, by exploring different aspects of his character. And so tonight we're going to begin by exploring the holiness of God. And so I want to ask, what comes to mind for you when you hear the word holy? If you're anything like me, often my mind goes to people that I would think of as holy. Maybe it's your friend that never swears, or that only listens to worship music, or, your friend that isn't on any social media. We often use other people as our marker for what holiness looks like. But friends, holiness is first and foremost about God. not about other people, because he is holy. God's holiness is actually the most distinct quality about him. It's what makes him who he is. And it's what makes him different to you and I. J.I. Packer, he says that holiness signifies everything about God that sets him apart from us. It covers all aspects of his transcendent greatness and moral perfection. His transcendent greatness and his moral perfection. Those are the two key aspects of God's holiness, and we're going to unpack what they look like tonight. But to put it simply, the equation for God's holiness is his moral purity and his transcendence. His moral purity and his transcendence. And we're going to unpack both of those ideas. To do that, we're going to go through Exodus 3 together. So if you have your Bible, who has their Bible? I see lots of Bibles in the room. Great job, grade 12 girls. Well done. We would love to encourage you to bring a physical Bible along to youth. We love going deep in the Word. And if you don't own a Bible, we would love to get you a Bible. So feel free to come chat to me after if you would like a Bible. But we're going to open to Exodus 3 together. And Exodus is the second book in the Bible. And so at this point in the story, God's people, the Israelites, find themselves in a bit of a sticky situation. They are in slavery in Egypt, which is the big power of the day. And God to them is this distant God of their ancestors, but not kind of a real present God to them. And in the previous chapters of Exodus, we meet a man named Moses. And Moses also finds himself in a sticky situation because he killed someone. So he ran away, and he has been living as a shepherd in a desert for 40 years. So this is where we pick up our story. So we're going to read from Exodus 3, verse 1 to 10 together. Now Moses was tending to the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then God said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And so in this story, we see those two aspects of God's holiness that I mentioned. And the first is his moral purity. So what we see here is that God is trying to get the attention of Moses because he has a message to get to him. Now, if you were God, if I was God, I feel like there's a lot of options for how you could get someone's attention, right? Like, we could put Moses' name in the sky, in stars. We could do the Red Sea thing again. That was pretty cool. He could do anything he wanted, but he chose to set a bush on fire, which I just feel like is kind of random. But I think that God does this intentionally because it shows us something about who God is. It shows us something about who God is. Now, I myself am not a goldsmith. I don't even know the word for it. But what I have learnt is that fire is used in the process of making gold, and that when you put gold into fire, the impurities, the flaws of the gold fall away. And so what remains in the fire is pure gold. Only the purest gold can withstand the fire. And so what stands out to Moses about this burning bush is that it is on fire, but it is not burning up. It is on fire, but it's not being destroyed. And so what we see here is just like gold that isn't consumed in fire because of its purity, the presence of the Lord is pure. He is perfect. He is flawless. He is without sin. And that's one of the aspects of God's holiness, that he cannot sin because sin is not in his nature. It's not who he is. He is a perfect God. He is a perfect God. And we also see the other part of God's holiness, his transcendence. Everyone say transcendence. I think it's quite a fun word myself. So we see in verse 5, God says, "Do not come any closer." And what God is saying in this moment to Moses is, Moses, there is a difference between you and I. I am God and you are not. I can burn in a bush and you cannot. And sometimes God needs to remind us that he is God and that we are not. Sometimes that is the best realization that we can have, that we are not God. And then God says to Moses, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Again, a very odd instruction for God to give Moses, to take off his shoes. Why does God tell Moses to do this? See, he tells him to do this because it is a symbol of humility. At this time, servants wouldn't wear shoes, they were barefoot. And so he was asking Moses to humble himself to the position of a servant. I don't know if when you go over to someone else's home, you have to figure out whether they are a shoes on or a shoes off kind of a family. Who comes from a shoes on family? Who comes from a shoes off family? My family is very chill. We are a shoes on family, but I don't know, apparently that's not good for your house. Anyway, God is saying to Moses, you are in my house right now. You are in my house. My presence is here. Take off your shoes. And so what we learn about God in this interaction is that he wants us to be humble. He wants us to realize that we are not God, that he is different to us. See, there is a distinction between us and him, and that's what that word transcendence means, that he is above us and beyond us, that we were all created beings, that God made all of us, but he was not made. He is high and mighty. Jackie Hill Perry says this, "We only think about holiness in relation to sin, but it is bigger than that. Yes, God is pure, but he is also high, distinct, different, and set apart." And so we see that God is pure and he is also transcendent. But what I love most in this story is what God does next. In verse 7, we read that the Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering." So we see that God has revealed himself to Moses, that he has revealed himself as pure, perfect, set apart, that he is bigger than us, beyond us, different to us. And yet still, he sees our suffering. He sees the suffering of his people. You know, I think for some of us, when we talk about how holy God is, it can make us shrink back a little bit. It can make us a bit uncomfortable because we think of a God that is so perfect, so flawless, so far above us, and we think of ourselves and our own brokenness, and we each know all too well how broken we are. And we think of the difference between us and God, and we get scared that that means that he'll reject us. But what we see here is that yes, God is separate from us, but he's not distant, that he is holy and yet he cares. And this is why, friends, you can't just take one aspect of who God is and focus all on that, because his kindness is all the more beautiful when you remember that he is also holy. He is also holy. And so often when we talk about holiness, we talk about what it means for us, what it means for you and I to pursue being holy. And that's a good conversation to have. But I think what we are called to remember is that first and foremost, holiness is about who God is. In verse 5, we see that God says to Moses, "The place you are standing on is holy ground." And I want to ask you guys, why is that ground holy? Like, did that piece of ground work really hard to be holy? Did that piece of ground set itself apart from all of the other ground? No. What we see here is that that ground is holy because it's where God's presence is. See, holiness is a state that God creates. Holiness occurs in proximity to God. It occurs in proximity to God. You know, so often in my life, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I think of being holy so often as a checklist that I have to follow. Holiness is about not watching those things and not going to those places and not acting like those people and not doing this and not doing that. And it just turns into this checklist that I have to follow. And when I think like that, I end up feeling tired and I end up feeling frustrated. Because instead of focusing on how beautiful and holy God is, I'm thinking about myself and how I can earn holiness. But when you look to God and you see that He is so distinct, so special, so holy, what you see is His beauty. And it changes what we want. No longer are we wanting to just earn His acceptance by making ourselves more holy. When we look to God, what we want is Him. We want His presence in our lives. And it is in that place that we are transformed to be more like Him, to be more holy, because holiness occurs in proximity to Him. I really wanted to keep this message quite short tonight because I think that the way that the Lord is calling us to respond together is in worship. And we see in a chapter in Isaiah 6, verse 1-3, this vision that the prophet Isaiah has. It says that he has a vision of the Lord. It says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, angels, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory.'" And the reason I share this with you tonight is because in that passage, we see that the angels covered their faces in God's presence. And in that story in Exodus 3, we see Moses do the same thing. He covers his face in God's presence. And sometimes when we hear that about Moses, it makes us kind of uncomfortable because we think that Moses is like hiding from God, that he's feeling shame. But when you look at these 2 stories and you realize that the angels do the same thing, these angels, they're not human, they're not broken, they're not sinful, they're not hiding in shame. They cover their faces because that's how overwhelming the presence of the holiness of God is. Even perfect beings respond to God with awe. Holiness isn't about fear, it's about recognizing that God is different to us. He's not just like you and I, He's not common and casual, He's set apart, He's distinct, He's full of glory. A God that we make for ourselves doesn't cause us to respond in awe like that. A God that we are comfortable with doesn't leave angels speechless. The God who is holy and beautiful, He is worthy of our worship.